Hello and welcome to a Juan Time podcast. I am your host Juan Camilo Gomez, and today we will be discussing zombies. But not just zombies, but also their depth and relationship to real life topics like waste, disposability, and otherness. So before we begin, what is disposability and what is otherness? Disposability tends to be seen as beliefs and practices that lead to the treatment of people as waste, as disposable and replaceable. And otherness would work as sort of a moral detacher in many of those cases, and it convinces people that those who are affected are less, are different, or even deserving of it. So, for example, in war, we can see one country or one team convincing themselves that the other team is less or deserving of death in many cases. Slavery would be very similar, and even capitalism, we would see behaviors like that from employers and big companies. So now let's go into zombies. Many of us might have the idea of the mainstream modern zombie, which has the traits of contagiousness, hunger for flesh, they work in hordes, they just chase living humans, and this is quite different to the original idea of the zombie, which comes from Haitian folk. It is related to magic, to hypnosis, through magical and chemical processes, and they are deeply rooted in slavery. They are seen by many people as a fear of slavery, as a slavery that continues even after death. And this can be seen in many of the first zombie films. So for example, we have White Zombie from 1932, which is considered by many to be the first mainstream zombie film. And it's important to note that it's not made by people from Haiti. So this implicates a bit of appropriation, not a bit, actually a lot of appropriation, and we can also see this in the plot. So the plot includes a white couple who moves to a plantation to celebrate their honeymoon. I guess they find that romantic, and the host falls in love with the bride. He asks help for a zombie master who is, worth noting, is not from Haiti, which again brings this topic of appropriation, and he does have a bunch of hypnotized or zombified slaves, and the zombie master does help the host. The bride dies or gets zombified, and in the end she's rescued and there's a happy ending. However, we can see the topic of waste and disposability in some problematic ways, because for example, no one cares about the dozens of zombified slaves that the slave master already has, and they just do when a white girl is affected by it, which can be seen as a sort of white girl syndrome, which is something we can see in real life constantly when there's minorities and groups that are constantly affected by problems, and no one really bats an eye when they are, until a white person or a white woman in many cases is affected by that same problem. And we can also see how the movie shows zombification taken away from its roots. So again, appropriation. The director, who is Bela Lugosi, who also plays the slave master, kind of fittingly, appropriates the culture of zombification to make his movie, and also inside the movie, zombification is used by a white person. And even then, it isn't shown as a real practice, a real belief, and instead it's shown as something evil that affects white people, and that comes from sort of a belief of superiority and moral superiority, specifically regarding culture of the enslaved people. So we have another movie from the very first ones. It's called I Walk with a Zombie, and people consider this one to be a bit better because it does show slavery being used by those who actually belong to the culture, but it's also problematic, and we'll be able to see why. So the plot includes a nurse who goes to care for an old plantation owner, and the slaves are using voodoo magic against them, and this leads to the demise of the family. And so this opens a good debate, because we can have the idea that is the only way to get rid of disposability, disposing of those who oppress others. It's like a big moral debate. Should we use violence? Is it justifiable? And regardless of what the answer is, the movie clearly seems to make a couple wrong steps towards this, because they very clearly show the victims of slavery as evil. And they have this character who's a doctor, and he's seen not only as a scientific figure, but also as a moral figure. So they can combine science and moral and religion as one. So there's one truth, the Western truth, and the rest is from this savage world. And this again shows slavery and slaves as the victimizers rather than as the victims. And it would be most likely the biggest issue that this movie has. And we can start seeing that there's really no good representations of the original zombie legend that comes from the Haitian folk. And we can also see that it is deeply connected to waste and disposability. And as we keep moving forward, this connection is still visible, but we stray away from Haitian folk. And we have the more contemporary zombie. And for example, we have a good example would be Train to Busan. And the general plot has a father going with his daughter to Busan in a train, and then they get trapped in the train with a growing zombie horde. And more important than the plot, we have characters, which would be an executive father, the daughter, a pregnant woman, a homeless man, and a businessman. And there's a certain set of dynamics that demonstrate neoliberalism and capitalism and disposability within that. So we have sacrifice of others, which is done a lot by the businessman, and it represents disposability within those systems, as disposing of others under those systems can be really beneficial. It can mean improvement of profits, it can mean climbing ladders. And again, the character who does this is a businessman who is seen as more of the antagonist even than the zombies themselves. But we also have a opposition of this, which would be self-sacrifice, and it's more done in emotional and altruistic ways, it could be said. So for example, we have the father sacrificing for the daughter, the homeless man sacrificing for the pregnant woman. Lots of examples throughout the movie. And even though it seems like a better position than sacrificing others, it might still be a bit problematic. So for example, if you think of why the homeless man sacrifices himself, or why everyone sacrifices themselves to help the youngest people, if you wanted to look at it somehow, you could say it's also relating to capitalism, as they might be considering who would be more useful to such systems, who would be able to produce for longer, who would be able to work for longer as well. So in conclusions, we have that the first movies really do not represent the Haitian folk. They victimize the offenders. They really don't care about waste and disposability, which is really evident through slavery, and they don't care about it until it affects white people. And there really is no good representation of the Haitian folk in any of these movies. And for the contemporary movies, we can say that they are way more self-aware. They do try to criticize society, but of course it can be hard when neoliberalism is so deeply rooted in everyone's mindset nowadays. And finally, to close the podcast, this was a one-time podcast. Thanks for joining us. Let us know if there's any other zombie movies that you think have deeper meanings or implications, and if we should analyze them. That was all, and thank you for joining us.